Well, good evening everyone, and welcome to the University Fellowship of Christians debate on Christians, Muslims and Easter, the cross of Jesus and salvation. I'd like to welcome those from the Uni Fellowship of Christian Society and to those from the Muslim Society. It is so good to share this evening with you. I hope that it provides mutual benefit to our student groups. Thank you for joining us in this way. And welcome to those visiting from the wider community, whether Christian, Muslim, or simply interested in this important topic. It is so good to have you share it with us. My name is Sarah. I'm studying a Bachelor of Music, and I'm the President of the University Fellowship of Christians here in Hobart. I'm opening and closing our main events tonight. The University Fellowship of Christians is a society at UTAS that provides a place for students to better understand Christianity, its claims, and the significance of the person and prophet Jesus has for their lives and study. Our hope for this evening's debate is that it is academically informative and intellectually stimulating for us all. More so, I hope it provides thoughtful insights to our religions, clarity on truth, and attractive and logical reasons for our beliefs and heartfelt convictions stirred for what this means for our lives and studies this evening. I would now like to introduce our moderator for this evening. Our moderator will take us through the debate proceedings. So welcome to Dr. Michael Guzzoni, UTAS School of Social Studies and the University Fellowship of Christians President in 2016. Thank you, Michael.
Great, thank you, Sarah, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honour to have you here this evening in the Sir Stanley Burbury Lecture Theatre. Our topic, as you've heard tonight, is Christians, Muslims and Easter, the cross of Jesus and salvation. And it's important that we talk about this not only because of the importance of each of these matters, but also given the time of year that we're in. As you know, it is Ramadan at the moment, a period of holy observance for those of the Islamic faith, and as well, we're coming up to Easter, which is likewise also a period of holy observance. And so the discussion of salvation and how this relates to Jesus or not is something that should be on our minds at the moment. And the two speakers that we have this evening are experts in their own right and well equipped to lead us in a discussion this evening. Debates have been had on subjects such as these for many centuries, and particularly in institutions such as these. And it's good that we can continue to have rigorous yet respectful interactions of this nature, and both of these men are quite good at doing that. And so it's my pleasure to introduce our two speakers. Shaykh Wesam Chakawi, who will be speaking for the Muslim position, and the Reverend Samuel Green, who will be speaking for the Christian position. Shaykh Chakawi is an Islamic scholar and community advocate. He is the founder of the Abu Hanifa Institute, which he founded in 2003, and this is an educative institution teaching Islamic sciences and the essential Islamic sciences. And he just mentioned to me that he's nearly finished his PhD in social psychology, which is very interesting to hear. We also have Samuel Green, Reverend Samuel Green. He is an ordained minister in the Anglican Church of Tasmania, and he has served in the Australian Fellowship of Evangelical Students for a number of years. Both these men have published books. They're both authors in their own right, and I'm sure that if you came to them afterwards, they'd happily tell you about these texts. Could you please welcome our two speakers? So for both speakers, accounts of Easter will be given and heard fairly and fully, and we really want to have an open and respectful conversation, and we want you to be involved in that as well. So later on this evening there will be a Q&A component, and you can either send in, it's not up there, but you will see an SMS line that you can text through your question, or there will be a little box which we'll hand around as a cushion, and you can ask your questions there. So as you hear our two speakers, please think about some questions, and I'll remind you of the procedure later on this evening. In terms of the format, it will be as followed. Each speaker will have 20 minutes to present, and then there will be replies of 10 minutes each. Following that, there will be replies again, but these will be for 5 minutes. Once that's done, the formal debate is over, and we'll enter Q&A, and then there'll be summary arguments by both speakers. Gentlemen, I will give you a ring on the bell when you have 1 minute left, and I'll continuously ring it when your time is up. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could ask that you please refrain from speaking over our speakers or interjecting in any way. And I've received instructions that if you do, I'm going to come over and talk to you directly. And I hope I don't have to do that. I trust I won't have to do that. Wonderful. The last pieces of housekeeping before we commence are twofold. Please make sure your mobile telephone is switched to silent or otherwise off so the proceedings are not interrupted this evening. And please note too that our proceedings will be filmed via video, and this is so that it can be accessed later on YouTube. So please be mindful of that. Wonderful. Without further ado, I'd like to please invite Samuel to come up and give his opening address. Please welcome Samuel.
All right, well, welcome everyone this evening. It's great to be with you. And for us, both Christians and Muslims, to be thinking about this important question at Easter time of the crucifixion of Jesus and salvation, the question of salvation and what God has done for us. Now, why are we discussing this? Well, it's because Christians and Muslims have actually very different views when it comes to this part of history, to Jesus being on the cross and being crucified for our sins. For the Christians, we believe that the divine Son of God took on a human nature, lived in obedience to his Father, and died as a sinless sacrifice, and that he was raised again, bringing forgiveness and eternal life. And that's what Easter is for us. For the Muslims, well, I'm going to wait for Wesam to tell us what his view is, but generally it's that Jesus didn't die on the cross, he only appeared to die, and that he certainly didn't die for our sins. And so that's why we're having this discussion. Now, I want to defend the position that Jesus was in fact crucified and that this brings about our salvation. But I will also be interacting with the Islamic position as I go along. So the structure of my talk is this. I'm going to look at, was Jesus crucified? How are we saved? And who offers salvation? So I'll get straight into it. Well, I want to look first of all at, was Jesus crucified? And I'm going to be looking from the Bible there. Now, what is the Bible? The Bible is not one book, but a collection of many books from many prophets over about a 1500-year period. Has the law of Moses and a whole range of other books. And so Christianity is actually based not on one book from one person, but all the prophets. And what we believe about God comes from reading all of the prophets. Now, I'm just going to read the parts in this 20-minute presentation which particularly refer to Jesus. And the first thing I want to say from the Bible is that Jesus explicitly says that he will be crucified. So we've got here, now as Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside and said to them, "We are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and turn him over to the Gentiles to be mocked, flogged, and crucified. On the third day he will be raised to life." Jesus, on the night before he was betrayed, said he took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to his disciples, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." And so we have these statements from Jesus saying he will be crucified. Of course, in the Gospels, they all record Jesus being crucified. When they had crucified him, they divided up his clothes by lots, with the Gospel according to Matthew. In Mark, they brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it, and then they crucified him. Luke and John both have similar statements where it explicitly says that Jesus was crucified. Now, it's not just that the Bible says this very explicitly, but if we look at historians at the time of Jesus and writers at the time, we see that they also confirm that Jesus was crucified. So this is from a man named Josephus, who was a Roman historian in the 1st century. And he writes of Jesus, "Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die, and those who became his disciples did not abandon his discipleship. They reported that he appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion and that he was alive." This is a non-Christian Christian Jewish source. We've got Tacitus writing at the beginning of the 2nd century. Chrestus, the founder of the name of Christians, had undergone the death penalty in the reign of Emperor Tiberius by the sentence of the procurator Pontius Pilate. And so again, confirming the execution of Jesus from a Roman historian source. And then we've got from the Jewish Talmud that Yeshua, Jesus, was hanged on Passover Eve. And so we've got these references from outside of the Bible, from sources which are actually hostile to Christianity, confirming the crucifixion of Jesus. And so when we look at historians, all historians today treat it as a historical fact that Jesus was crucified. So Jesus was executed on the orders of the Roman prefect Pontius Pilate. That's by E.P. Sanders, who's got one of the standard histories, secular histories of Jesus. It was not on a Jewish religious indictment, but on a secular accusation that he was condemned by the emperor's delegate to die a shameful death on a Roman cross. That's a Jewish historian. Now, this is actually a Muslim historian. He says Jesus was betrayed by the Jews and crucified. Allah lifted him to the heavens. And then finally, Bart Ehrman, many people here are probably a fan of him. I am convinced beyond a shadow of doubt that Jesus was physically crucified and died on the cross. So, in terms of historians, it's a historical fact that Jesus died on the cross. There's complete consensus in this regard. Now, what about with the Quran? Well, the main verse that's referred to is this verse here. I'm just going to get us to read it now so I can interact with the Islamic position. It says, they, that is the unbelievers, they said, we killed Christ Jesus, the son of Mary, the apostle of God, but they killed him not, nor crucified him. But so it was made to appear to them. And those who differ about this are full of doubts, with no knowledge, but only assumption to follow, for of certainty they killed him not. Rather, God raised him to himself. Now, when you read that, those verses may seem like a straight denial of the crucifixion, but I want to give you two reasons why I think they're not. The first is, what do they actually say? Notice they do not say Jesus did not die. What they say is that the unbelievers did not kill or crucify him. Notice also who it's referring to. It's saying that it appeared to the unbelievers that they killed and crucified Jesus, but they did not. It's not saying that it appeared this way to everyone. It's very specific. It's saying this is how it appeared to the unbelievers. And finally, when it speaks about Jesus being raised up to God, well, every martyr is raised up to God in Islamic theology. Every martyr goes to God. So that's not necessarily a straight-out denial. But I've got a second reason which I think is even stronger. And that is, we've got two other verses in the Quran which speak about the crucifixion of Jesus. We've got Surah 3:55 and 5 verse 117. And it says, when God said to Jesus, I am going to mutawafiki and raise you to me. And then again, I, Jesus, was a witness over them, the Jews, as long as I was with them. When you tawafaytani, me. Now, this is the same word. It's just constructed differently with pronouns. It was you who were a watcher over them. Now, what's interesting about those two words is that they're used 24 times in the Quran. And I've given you the list there, and we're just going to look at 3 of them. But on every single occasion, it means the taking of the soul. Every single occasion, it means taking of the soul. So, and those who are mutawafiki, taken in death, among you and leave wives behind. Our Lord, so forgive us our sins and remove from us our misdeeds, and mutawafiki, cause us to die, the righteous. You see how this is being translated? And it is he who takes your souls by night and knows what you have committed by day. So my point here is that there are 2 other verses in the Quran which use this exact word, which is only ever used for the taking of the soul, and that's how it's describing the crucifixion. And so, in conclusion, I want to say that the Bible and historians are clear that Jesus was crucified, And I would argue that the Quran is not denying this either when we consider all of the verses and actually what the verses are saying. Now, I want to move on to my second point now. My second point is, how are we saved? How are we saved? So I've established, I believe, that Jesus definitely was on the cross. What does the Bible say about salvation? Well, it begins with our situation, and that is that we are trapped in sin. That sin has affected every area of our life, and we cannot do enough good deeds to save ourselves before God. We're trapped in sin. And so we need to be rescued. And much of the Bible is the story of God rescuing people. It's one of the big themes. And when God rescues people, he normally has a sacrifice involved. So I want us to look at the first rescue that we see with Abraham and his son. So God commands Abraham to sacrifice his son. And it's said to be in Genesis 22 a test, where God is testing Abraham. Now, Abraham passes the test. He passes the test. And so in one sense, he's passed the test. It could have been over, couldn't it? God said, sacrifice your son. Abraham's about to sacrifice his son. God says, don't. It could have stopped there, but his son is rescued by a substitute sacrifice. He could have just not had done anything, but God rescued Isaac by the substitute sacrifice. And so that's the first rescue that we see. We then see the nation of Israel in Egypt. And here we see God's people helpless under the control of Pharaoh and the Egyptians. They're unable to save themselves. And so God raises up one man, Moses, and he says to Moses, I'm going to bring 10 judgments on Egypt. And there's the first 9 judgments, but the last one's called the Passover lamb. And in the Passover lamb, the Israelites had to sacrifice a lamb, take its blood and paint it on the doorposts of their houses. Now, God could have just taken them out. God didn't have to have a sacrifice, did he? I mean, he just could have taken them out. But God rescues with a substitute sacrifice. And so what we see is that the lamb is killed, the blood is put on the doorposts, and then when the judgment of God comes, those where the blood of the lamb is are saved, and those without the blood of the lamb perish. And so we see here that God saves through a substitute sacrifice. Now, of course, we've got the Day of Atonement as well. This is where the Israelites had their temple set up, and they would defile the temple through their sinfulness. And so once a year they would have what's called the Day of Atonement, or the Yom Kippur as it's called. And in this, part of the sacrifices were to bring 2 goats. And one goat was sacrificed as a sin offering for the people in their place. And then the second one, the priest would lay his hands on it, confess Israel's sin over it, and then it was sent out into the wilderness to perish and to take the sins away. But again, it's the idea that there's a substitute sacrifice to save God's people from God's wrath. Now, what we see is that the prophets, when they speak about the future, they speak about God's coming salvation, they say that God himself is going to make an atonement for sin. The word atonement means to turn aside God's anger. And so this is in the prophet Ezekiel. He says, so I will establish my covenant with you, and you will know that I am the Lord. Then I will make atonement for you for all you have done. You see, God's going to bring atonement. God's going to bring about the turning aside of his wrath. And we see this explicitly when we come to the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah's got this double-barreled prophecy about the coming gospel and the one who the gospel's going to be about. So it begins in Isaiah 52. He says, how beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news. Now that word for good news in Hebrew is bashara, and that's the word for gospel. So how beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news, who proclaim peace, who bring good news and good tidings, who proclaim salvation, who say to Zion, your God reigns. So there's going to be a future gospel, about God's salvation. And then the next chapter that comes is about the one who's going to bring this. And it says here, "Who has believed our message? To whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and to cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life a guilt offering, he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors." Now this is this amazing prophecy about the servant of the Lord who is going to bear the sins of others. And it's connected with the coming gospel. Now, that's Jesus, isn't it? There's only one person who's brought a gospel and brought this message. And so I hope you can see that when it comes to understanding the gospel, it's not just that it's a New Testament thing. It's not just that it's something that Christians believe. It's actually something that's prophesied and foretold in the prophets before Jesus. All the categories to understand God through the prophet, through the sacrifice of Abraham and of the Passover lamb and the Day of Atonement. These will give us our categories to understand how God saves. And it's through a sacrifice, a substitute sacrifice, and we see this in the other prophets saying it'll be for the one who suffers for others. Now, what about Islam at this point? Well, the Quran obviously doesn't teach this type of thing. And so I'm not, whereas I want to say the Quran does, it doesn't discount the crucifixion. When it comes to this, it certainly doesn't have this idea. But it still has some ideas that I think we could get clear on. So for instance, there is verses in the Quran which say, "Every soul earns only to its own account. No soul laden bears the load of another." And Muslims will say, see, Jesus can't die for our sins. But if you read that, notice what it says. It says, no soul laden, that is with its own sin, can bear the sins of others. And we agree with that. See, what does the Bible say? It says, "For our sake, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God." Jesus can bear our sins because he's sinless. He's not like anyone else. Now, what's interesting is that in the Quran, there are examples of other people bearing other people's sins. And they will bear their burdens in full on the day of the resurrection, and also the burdens of those whom they misled without knowledge. Evil is indeed what they shall bear. And so here we see this idea within the Quran that you can bear somebody else's sins under certain circumstances. And then we've got this interesting one in the Hadith, narrated by Ibn Abbas. A woman from the tribe of Juhayna came to the Prophet and said, "My mother had vowed to perform Hajj, but she died before performing it. May I perform Hajj on my mother's behalf?" Now, Hajj is where Muslims go on pilgrimage to Mecca. The Prophet replied, "Perform Hajj on your mother's behalf. Had there been a debt on your mother, would you have paid it or not? So pay Allah's debts, as he has more right to be paid." Now, what's interesting there is that in Islamic theology, you can actually do an act of righteousness that's credited to someone else, which is actually, that's the Christian view as well. We believe Jesus' righteousness is credited to us. Now, I want to move on to my final point in my last 2 minutes and ask the question, who offers salvation? Now, in Christianity, there is an act of God to save you from your sins. However, there is no act of God in Islam for salvation. Allah gives you his law, and you are to do good deeds, and hopefully you'll get enough good deeds. So Islam does not offer salvation in the way that Christianity offers salvation. In many ways, Christianity is the only religion that actually says God has done something for you. God has fixed up your sin problem for you. We see this with Muhammad. "Say, I am not something new among the messengers, and I do not know what will be done with me or with you. I only follow what is revealed to me." There's the verses of the Quran, and there's the Hadith, which I haven't got time to look at, where Muhammad says he doesn't know what will happen to him beyond the grave. So know, O Muhammad, there is no God except Allah, and ask forgiveness for your sins and for the sins of believing men and women. You see, Muhammad needed his sins forgiven. He's in a very different situation to us. Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry, and he who believes in me will never be thirsty. Christianity and Islam are offering completely different types of salvation. In Christianity, it's what God has done to you. In Islam, you've got to earn it. There is no salvation. So just to briefly finish up, tonight we've looked at, was Jesus crucified? And I've said the Bible is clear, history is clear, and I want to argue that the Quran doesn't deny it. How are we saved? Well, we've seen that through the prophets, God rescues us through a substitute sacrifice. And there's some of that in the Quran, but not much. And then finally, who offers salvation? Well, I would say that in the Bible, God has done something to save us. God has done something to save you, and that's what we're celebrating this Easter. But there's nothing like that in Islam. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samuel. I'd like to now invite Wesam to give his opening statement. Thank you.
In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, thank you very much for having me here today. Thank you very much, Samuel. And to everybody that's here, I hope to engage in a robust conversation. And so let me start by saying first, as you see on the slide, Christ was not crucified. And it's the emphatic statement that is given in the Quran, in the holy book of Islam. And so we say in this emphatic statement, in this particular verse, or in fact part of our beliefs, is that we say that Jesus Christ the Messiah, he is the son of Mary, and he's a highly revered figure in Islam. There's no doubt about that. He's one of the mightiest messengers in Islam. As a general rule, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of God be upon him, he didn't come to introduce a new religion. Basically, what he came to do was renewal. It was in fact something to correct the misinterpretations and interpolations that had in fact crept in to faiths before. Furthermore, when we talk about, for example, Jesus being a word from God, what we mean by that in Islam is that Jesus was born without any male intervention. And so God said, be, and he was. And that's what we mean by the word be. And lastly, when we say that the word, or that God, or that Jesus, for example, is a word, we use the same word, for example, for Abraham. It simply means that God said be, and they were. So what we have is effectively a noun of possession, not of attribution. In other words, they're not divine. It's like saying God's house, but not that it is literally God's house, but rather it may be a connection that he has. So God owns in the terms of possession, not that they share in his divinity, which is really important to highlight that. Now, in Islam's position, we look at the Quran 517, chapter 4, 517 in the Quran. The Quran makes an emphatic statement, and the Quran is without doubt. They did not kill him. They did not crucify him. And it appeared to them. This is a literal historic statement. They did not kill, conviction. This is certainty. They did not crucify him, certainty. What they talk about is only conjecture. So the Quran makes an emphatic point here that what they are talking about is nothing other than doubt and doubtful. And in fact, they have no knowledge, simply guesswork. And God repeats this statement at the end of a surety. They did not kill him. So there can be no more absolute position about Jesus' alleged crucifixion and survival than the one that you see today, that in fact that he survived, he is alive, and he was taken alive, and he did not die. Now, it was made to appear like that. This is the statement of contention. What you heard Samuel say just now about all the scholars saying something different, God said it was made to appear that way. What was made to appear that way? This is where there's conjecture. Islam, in the sense, the Quran didn't explain how it was made to appear. As a believer, all I am meant to accept is they did not kill, they did not crucify, and he survived. And he went to God alive. But how it was made to appear, in regards to that, we are not bound to have or to believe one way or the other. There is an opinion in Islam, sure, there is an opinion in Islam which does talk about some of the things about whether it was an illusion, whether it was a myth, whether someone was substituted. Samuel has spoken about all of these things and he's mentioned some of them, but all of them outright deny that there was a death and outright deny that there was a crucifixion. Now Samuel spoke about before, interesting point that he mentions, he spoke about the word mutawaffa and what this means, and it's an interesting point because in reality what he's talking about is a verse that he brings up in chapter 3 verse 55 where God says inni mutawaffika, and he uses the word inni mutawaffika, I shall take you. Now the etymology of that word you see in the blue, mutawaffika, the etymology of that word does not necessarily mean death. It doesn't. It actually means I shall take you. But what does that mean? Does it always mean death? Well, no, it doesn't, because in chapter 39:42 God uses the word tawaffa for someone who doesn't die. So when Samuel said, no, it's used for death in every single occasion, well, no, it's used for the one who sleeps, and the one who sleeps does not biologically die. And that's in Surah An-Naml. You can check it there for yourself. Now, it's interesting in this point because Jesus, in the Quran, when he uses the word death for himself, he uses the word maut. Maut is the word death. And he said, Yawma amutu. He said, peace be upon me the day that I was born. And he said, and the day that I die. And he uses the word maut, not tawaffa. He doesn't use that word. So God doesn't use that word when he's saying, I took him. He doesn't use the word maut. So Samuel, in making that declaration to say that mutawaffa or mutawaffika, that this means death for every single occasion, this is simply not true. The Quran makes an absolute emphatic statement that they did not kill nor crucify. And this is the opinion in Islam. And so, you know, when we talk about some of the various different views, you know, there's this view of substitution. And we're going to talk about substitution, but I think it's very valuable to highlight this particular point. There's going to come a time, this is in chapter 4, 159 of the Quran, where he mentions that every single person of the people of the book will come to believe in Jesus before the death of Jesus. Every single person, Jew and Christian, will come to believe in the actual messengership of Jesus before the death of Jesus, which is a confirmation that Jesus did not die. This is over and over and over again, but we don't need to repeat that because we only have 20 minutes. But fundamentally, the Quran, for example, Tabari, he says that indeed the Prophet Isa was taken by God alive. He was received well by the inhabitants of the heavens alive, and Tabari holds that he did not die. Furthermore, Muslims agree that Jesus left this earth alive. He did not suffer death. The Prophet, peace be upon him, the Prophet Muhammad, he said that Jesus will return to earth, and he will return towards the end of time. But he doesn't come back in the function of a prophet, even though he is a prophet. It's not his function. But he does give rulings, he leads, but he doesn't come back in that function, even though he no doubt is a prophet, which we accept. Now, when we talk about it was made to appear, obviously Muslims, they do have a substitute theory. And the substitute theory that they do consider is that his enemy, or his betrayer, Judas, was given the appearance of Jesus, and that is the one who was placed or put forward between the Roman soldiers who came and didn't find anybody. God cast an appearance over Judas, and Judas was subsequently taken and crucified and killed. And that is one of the theories. Now, in Islam, like we said, how was it made to appear? These are some of the various opinions. Some say, in fact, that it was one of the disciples of Jesus. Some say, in fact, that we don't even accept the substitution theory, but rather it was a lie. When the soldiers got there, they found nobody. You get the point, right? How it was made to appear is the point where many have spoken about. But the emphatic statement is they did not kill nor crucify, and he survived. As to how it was made to appear, that's the point that many can have an opinion about. And that doesn't take away from what we're talking about tonight. So, this point about substitution early on, and I think this is a really critical point, because Samuel was talking about, establishing the crucifixion and establishing that this is an absolute fact. Well, it's not, because in reality, the substitution theory wasn't actually first put forward by Islam. The substitute theory was put forward by Christianity. In fact, Basilides, who was part of the Christian community and was in the first century, he was the first one who proclaimed, and he said that it was Simon of Cyrene, that in fact it wasn't Jesus. So the Quran wasn't the first one to posit the substitution theory, or to posit it was made to appear that way. In fact, it was Basilides who said, and was very close, Basilides was living so close to the disciples of Jesus, who said, in fact, it was Simon of Cyrene. So there was another view. You had the Philadelphians. Now, Ignatius wrote a letter to the community of the Philadelphians and said, what are you doing? Why are you holding this theory? Because they said that in the Old Testament, there was no prophecy that Jesus would be crucified. So Ignatius was upset at the Philadelphians, wrote a letter to them and said, what are you guys talking about? What's happening? What are these statements you're putting out? The Trallians, Ignatius also wrote a letter to that community, because they believed that Jesus, in terms of the crucifixion, it was only in appearance. It was only in appearance. Furthermore, when we look at the other communities, such as, for example, the Docetics, again, Jesus was made to appear to be crucified. This is not, I'm not quoting the Quran here. I'm not quoting the prophetic hadith. This is from the Christian community early on. We're talking in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd centuries. This is the views that they held. Furthermore to that, we have the apocryphal Acts. We have also the Gnostic Christians. The Gnostic Christians, they said at the crucifixion, Jesus, or the Christ, ascended to God. So this point about, or this contention, or this accusation, sometimes people lay against the Quran to say the Quran deceived, or it was deceptive because it was made to appear. No, the truth has always been out there. The Christian community was saying this very early on, that it was made to appear that way. Not everybody believed that Jesus died. Not everybody believed that he was put on the cross and that he was crucified. So this was, in fact, Bart Ehrman says, I do not think that we can show historically that Jesus was in fact raised from the dead. Now, Samuel is saying that historically we can prove it. Well, Bart Ehrman, which we can quote from his text, which I have here, he said historically we can't show that he was raised from the dead. Furthermore, we also have Professor Larry Hurtado, who wrote a central piece about the Testament, the New Testament manuscripts. He said effectively the whole dynamic in which the crucifixion occurred was in fact the impact of a larger pagan environment. This is not our topic of today, but something that in fact I did want to mention. Now, the charge that people lay against the Quran, obviously it's an unfair charge, because again, this point or this perspective that it was made to appear that way occurred very, very early on. Now, if somebody didn't know that, Islam says, well, you're not held to account for what you don't know. So, just moving on very quickly, Jesus prayed to be saved. Now, I'm going to get into this point of prophecy. I think it's really important, but Jesus prayed to be saved. In Matthew, when he went to Gethsemane, Jesus constructed his disciples. He left some of them outside, then he took another two in, and then he fell on his face and he prayed. He said, oh God, he said, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Let it pass from me. This is a prophecy. In Hebrews 5:7, right? God heard his prayers. He prayed to God and his prayers was heard. You know what's interesting? What's interesting is a man named Alphonse Valhanok, according to Bar Ehrman, he tried to insert the word not heard to conform to a particular narrative of Christianity. Now, Bart Ehrman is an expert in his own right. He's a New Testament scholar, and he mentioned quite clearly that this man, Alphonse, he attempted to put in that particular into that particular passage that Jesus was, in fact, his prayers were not heard, which was simply not the case, and it was not true, because his prayers were heard. And what that means is, in fact, that his prayers were accepted. So what are some of the prophecies which I think are really important to discover and to go over? The first one that I want to go over is a New Testament prophecy that confirms an Old Testament prophecy. Now, what this prophecy is about is this. The devil takes Jesus he takes him to the holy city, he takes him to a high place, and then he says, it is written, throw yourself down, you'll be protected, the angels will come, they'll protect you, they'll make sure your body doesn't hit the ground, and they'll protect you from all things. Jesus confirms the prophecy. So Jesus says in the prophecy, he says, it is also written. So Matthew is confirming an old prophecy, and that old prophecy is in Psalms 91. Because Jesus said, it is also written. What's also written? What's Psalms 91? Well, Psalms 91, if we have a look at Psalms 91, what that is in fact where Jesus says, or where the Old Testament states that Jesus will not be harmed. No harm will come to him. No disaster will come near him. God's angels will come. They will protect him from all ways, so on and so on and so forth. Now, what's interesting is that Samuel quoted Isaiah 53. Right? So we have now a testimony. We have a prophecy saying that Jesus will not be harmed. No harm is going to come to him. He confirms an old prophecy. No harm can come to him. Now, in Isaiah 53, right? We go to Isaiah 53 because Psalms 91 overrides any ambiguous text. Isaiah 53 is actually applicable to somebody else. Psalms 22, which I'm sure Samuel might want to have something to say about, but we'll get there later. But in Isaiah 53, what's interesting is Isaiah 53 does not apply to Jesus. And the reason why it doesn't apply to Jesus is because Jesus doesn't fulfill the prophecy. The reason why it doesn't fulfill the prophecy is because it talks about offspring, and it mentions Zerah. Zerah is actually progeny and offspring. And it's also related in Genesis about Abraham, and it mentions the word Zerah. And it also talks about being or having prolonged days on earth. This is not a prophecy, Isaiah 53, that a lot of people use, unfortunately, that to try and prove the resurrection or prove the crucifixion. Isaiah 53 doesn't apply. How do we know that for certain? Because in the Bible itself, in the HarperCollins Study Bible, it said that, in fact, Isaiah 53 actually holds for the suffering of the Israelites. In the Oxford Study edition of the New English Bible, it also says that it's referring to the destruction and exile of Israel. It's not talking about Jesus, it's not talking about the Messiah. It's not referencing that. So what we have is an old prophecy that Jesus cannot be harmed. And Psalms 22, and I'll wait for Samuel to mention Psalms 22 because I'll have a response on that as well. But what we get, in fact, that Isaiah 53 can be applied to any of the people of God that suffer. So, just on that point, as we move along, being short of time, we have as well the sign of Jonah. Now, the sign of Jonah in the Bible is another testament, is another prophecy. The sign of Jonah, they come to Jesus, they want to know, they want a sign, they want to prove that he is, or they want him to prove that he's the messenger, they want confirmation. And he said, you wicked and adulterous nation, you seeketh a sign, you shall have no sign but one, and that sign shall be the sign of Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale, alive, so shall the Son of Man be buried in the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. That was the prophecy that Jesus gave them. That's exactly what he said. Jesus ought to fulfill this prophecy, but he doesn't. Because what happened very clearly, when Jonah was thrown out of the boat, he was alive. When Jonah was in the sea, he was alive. When Jonah was swallowed by the fish, he was alive. He wasn't dead. When Jonah was in the belly of the fish, he was praying to God, he was alive. Then the fish vomits Jonah. Jonah is still alive. But in the sepulchre, what's the presumption? The presumption is Jesus is dead. The presumption is Jesus is not alive. Well, he doesn't fit the prophecy. Now, even if Samuel wants to argue a point on that, well, the 3 days and the 3 nights, what's interesting is Jesus did not even fulfill that, because he was put up on the cross on the Friday and had to be taken down before the Sabbath. 3 hours, according to the scriptures of the Bible, is what he spent on the cross. So the complete total is 1 day and 2 nights. He didn't even fulfill the prophecy if you say that he was crucified. This is clearly a prophecy from Jesus himself, which he does not fulfill. So if you look at what we have thus far, these miracles, all the prophecies, Matthew again with the devil taking Jesus to the holy place, and Psalms, that's a prophecy. An accepted prayer is a prophecy in Hebrews 5:7. The sign of Jonah is a prophecy. The bones not broken of Jesus, which according to the text, which I'll quote you later, the bones not broken. These are just some of the things that we talk about are prophecies that Jesus would in fact be protected, and there is no questions in that. Now, when we talk about some of the discrepancies, there are a lot of discrepancies in the Bible that we talk about the crucifixion and about all other details in terms of the events and in fact historical events. All of the oldest manuscripts are in Greek, all of them. The oldest known one is called P52, and P52 dates back to the 2nd century. It's the size of a credit card. Now, according to the scholars, there's 6,000 Greek manuscripts and no 2 pages are identical. The problems are so vast, people playing with the Gospels, people playing and inserting and taking away. It has implications. One of the greatest scholars, Origen, was aware of these things, and he said that people, some of the copyists, either they were negligent, they inserted, they shortened, they lengthened. He said, but this is what, there's egregious errors within the scripts of old, and nothing is written in the Hebrew. It's all in Greek. We're talking about 100 to 150 years after Jesus is lifted to God. You imagine you're a juror, and you imagine there's a chain in the break of evidence 100 to 150 years after the fact. How do you accept that evidence so long after the fact? And so when we look at just as an example, we look in the Bible, for example, in Luke 10:1, we have in the New International Version the difference between 70, 72, and 70. Now that's just a numerical number, but which is the inspired word of God? Which is a point to ask. Now, Bruce Metzer, he said, all known witnesses of the New Testament are to a greater or lesser extent mixed texts. Everything is mixed, and even several of the earliest manuscripts are not free from egregious errors. There's so many errors. But what are the theological implications? The theological implications are such, is that it? I didn't get a first one. Did I get a first? Okay, all right. So, I'm out of my 20 minutes. I wish I'll be back.
Wonderful, thank you, Wesam. So we now enter the rebuttal stage, and each speaker is given 10 minutes to give their rebuttal. So Samuel will come up first and give 10 minutes, and Wesam will then follow with his 10 minutes.
Thank you for that lively presentation, Wesam, and I've always enjoyed meeting with Wesam and exchanging our ideas. I'm going to begin with your first statement about Jesus is highly revered in Islam, but I want to say what Muslims actually believe in that regard is what Muhammad says about Jesus. And that's a different thing. Muslims will say they believe all the prophets, but that means in practice listening to what Muhammad says about the prophets. Whereas I said in my first presentation that the Bible has all the books of the prophets in it, and so when we say we believe in them, we read them. We don't just have one person tell us about them. Now, in terms of Surah 4:157, as I pointed out, the verse seems to be saying that it's referring to the unbelievers and what it appeared like, lahum, to them. And so it's saying what it appeared like to the unbelievers. And so I understand by what I said that it's saying this is what it appeared like to the unbelievers. But what it appeared like to everyone else is a different question. Now, you challenged my view on my statement about Surah 3 verse 55, and you said that I said every reference to it was about death. I said it was about taking the soul, which is a little bit different, but you referred to Surah 39 verse 42, and that's a good one to refer to because that one is actually about sleep. And what you need to realise is that in Islamic theology, when you go to sleep, your soul goes up to Allah. Your soul is taken. And then if Allah wills, your soul is returned in the morning and you're alive. So Christians and Muslims actually have a different doctrine of death. And so what I said was true to Surah 9 verse 42 when it's speaking about Allah taking your soul in sleep. In Islamic theology it's called the little death. When you sleep, you're in the little death. Now, Imam Bukhari actually agrees with me. So in his tafsir on Surah 5, verse 157, he quotes Ibn Abbas, and he says, Ibn Abbas says that mutawafiki means death. Now, I'm going to, where am I up to in my time? I want to get onto the Christian stuff in particular. You referred to Basileus, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, and you said that he had the idea that it was Simon of Cyrene who was crucified in place of Jesus, and this is true. But you need to understand what these people believed. When the gospel went out, it went out into the Greek world, and for the Greeks, the physical is bad, and the spiritual is good. And so Jesus was not physical. This is what they believed. Jesus was not physical. It's not just that Jesus only appeared to die on the cross. Jesus only appeared to walk. Jesus only appeared to be with anybody. He was just like a phantom, like a projection on the screen, because they believed he was God, they believed he was divine, and the divine could in no way touch the physical. This is their Greek philosophical background that they're coming from. And so, yes, they said that Jesus wasn't crucified, or a body was in his place, but that's because they didn't believe Jesus was physical. He didn't actually have a physical body. So it's a different story to it. There's more to it than just that. And so what is interesting is that you're right, the Quran's not the first one to bring up these ideas, but it actually shows us where Muhammad gets his ideas from. There are many Gnostic Gospels in the Quran, and so we can actually see that Muhammad is listening to these stories. He's not quoting the New Testament, he's quoting Gnostic stories, and for the Gnostics, the Creator was evil. God did not make the physical. He made something less, and then that lesser thing made the physical, because God can't touch the physical. And they had all these stories about Jesus sort of expressing that. Now, you mentioned Matthew 26, where Jesus says, may this cup be taken from me. But please read all of it. What he says is, not my will be done, but your will. And so Jesus submits himself to the will of his Father and accepts that crucifixion is that path. And if you just continue to read the story, that's where it goes. You referred to Hebrews chapter 5 about Jesus' prayer being heard. His prayer was heard. Of course God hears his prayer, but he still had a path to walk. God hears our prayers, but we still have a path to walk. It may not be answered in the way that we want. And so in the rest of Hebrews, it's very clear that Jesus actually died. It says, we see him who was for a little while made a little lower than the angels, now crowned with glory and honour, because he suffered death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. Hebrews 2 verse 9, and there are many other references to the death of Jesus in Hebrews. Psalm 91. Now, you're absolutely right. The devil does bring up Psalm 91 at the start of Jesus' ministry and says to him, look at this promise in Psalm 91, that God's chosen one will not strike his foot against a stone. And so I think it's fair to bring that up. But what's interesting is that the gospel actually deals with this question. So the devil brings it up and says to Jesus, see, you don't have to suffer, Psalm 91. But when we keep reading, what we find, let me make sure I get the right notes here. What we find is that Jesus says, just before his crucifixion, do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen this way? You see, Jesus didn't have to go to the cross. As God's chosen one, his precious son, he was the protected one of God, but he voluntarily laid it aside for you. Jesus didn't have to go to the cross for you. He had all the blessings of God, and he lays them aside for you. And the gospel actually deals with that as you keep reading, where we actually see Psalm 91 played out later on in the ways that I've just said. Now, I will keep going. Isaiah 53, you said it can't be about Jesus because it talks about the servant having offspring. Well, it also talks about the servant being raised from the dead, and so his offspring are from the resurrection. And this is exactly what we believe as Christians, that Jesus is the second Adam, the new man, bringing about a new humanity. And so we can't miss out that the resurrection element of Isaiah 53, because that tells us what the children look like. And now I'll quickly go to the sign of Jonah. Now, first of all, with Jonah, when we listen to Jonah's prayer, he actually says that he's in the grave. From inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God, and he said, "In my distress I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From the depths of the grave I called for help, and you listened to my cry." And so Jonah's actually saying he's in the grave. Often Muslims use this and say, oh, Jonah was alive in the fish. Well, Jonah says he's in the grave. But if you're going to use the sign of Jonah, then we need to look at it, because if we're just going to take it as Jonah was alive in the fish, was Jonah in the fish? Yes. Therefore, Jesus was on the cross. So if you're going to take the sign of Jonah, you're actually also showing that Jesus is on the cross as Jonah was in the fish, and it wasn't a substitute for Jonah in the fish. It was Jonah himself in the fish. And so the sign of Jonah that Jesus spoke about, when we just read it in context, he says it's referring to his death when we just keep reading in Matthew 16. I'll finish up with, you were speaking about the manuscripts of the Greek New Testament, and it is true, with handwritten large documents, when you get them, no two ancient documents, not just the Bible but anything, no two documents are identical. Yes, but it's the same for the Quran. You go and get the ancient manuscripts of the Quran, and these are all online now, and they have small variants among them in the same way that the Bible does. That's what happens when you write things by hand. You're saying that people were adding things to the Bible and taking them out. That's simply not what the textual evidence shows. We've got ancient copies, ancient translations, and ancient quotes, and they show that the text of the New Testament is stable. You referred to Origen talking about the text of the New Testament. I've actually written an article on that where I go through all the examples that Origen gives, and they're the ones we have in our footnotes. They're actually no different. But what I do want to say is that saying that can create the impression that that's not the case for the Quran. But the Quran has different, what are called qira'ats or readings, which is where the dots and dashes are placed in different places in the Arabic. And sometimes it leads to quite different sentences. So you have your own textual issues as well, but I'd want to say that for both of us, both texts have been well preserved. I'll finish up there. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Samuel. Just quickly, look, my honest view is that you did not deal with those in any sound fashion, and the reason why is because if we look at, for example, Psalms 22, which you were quoting, and you didn't say it, but you were talking about Psalms 22, where you said Jesus was on the cross and then he relinquished. He said, if I call for 12 legions of lions, so on and so forth. The Messiah is never mentioned in Psalms 22. And further to that, the people at the time, the Jews at the time, no one ever thought that it was referring to the Messiah who would come. There was never this inclination that it was referring to the Messiah. So Psalms 22, you can't quote it. And Isaiah 53, as we've said, the Bibles themselves are saying this applies to the exiled Israelites. It doesn't apply. And Zerah is very, very clear that he doesn't fulfill the prophecy. And you both have a literal statement and a metaphor. So he doesn't really do that justice in that regard. Furthermore, the sign of Jonah, he didn't answer that properly either. The sign of Jonah, he doesn't spend 3 days, 3 nights in the belly of the whale. And the miracle is, because it's a miracle, and the miracle is that he's alive. That's the miracle here, life and death. I'm not saying it, Jesus is saying it. But that's the miracle, and he doesn't deal adequately with it. You could say that somebody spent time outside of their house for 2 days. You could bring any scenario and substitute it in its place if you hold the same logic that Samuel just said. He is saying the same as was Jonah. What was Jonah? Alive, 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale. That shall be the sign. And it simply did not apply in this case. He did not fulfill the prophecy. He didn't answer that properly at all. Also, when he talks about, for example, that it not be my will, it be your will, in the Testaments. I'm not going to basically take him on that point, because every prophet said that. It's not my will, it's your will. It's not our will, it's God's will. As a prophet, you have to say that. You expect that. We have to expect that from prophets. But what did Hebrews 5:7 say? God heard his prayers. In other words, God accepted his prayers. So of course a prophet will say, it's not my will, it's your will. This is the sign of humility, and he is of the greatest messengers. Of course he would say that, and we would expect that. But then to say that this is a sign, therefore, that he's relinquishing life and this doesn't simply exist. Then furthermore to say and to quote, for example, that the prophet, he mentioned that the Prophet Muhammad quoted the Gnostic story. I'm not sure what you were saying there, implying there. I didn't quite grasp it, but the Prophet never quoted from the scriptures. The Prophet Muhammad never quoted from the scriptures. And the Quran is divinely inspired. And he referred to the qira'at, like the variant. He talked about the dots, and he talked about some of the dashes in the Quran. But the dots and the dashes in the Quran are all revealed. They're all through revelation. You see, when you have a book that's revealed by God, God in the Quran, we don't say they're the only words that he can speak. The Quran, every single word, dot, dash and letter, and even the other dots, dashes and letters, right? These are all revealed. These are all inspired by God. They were brought through Gabriel to the Prophet Muhammad. It's a direct link. There is not 100 to 150 years time difference. Now, I'll just give you an example. If you have a look at the theological implication, which is what I'm talking about here, it's a theological implication. In the first epistle of John, right? The first epistle of John, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. The Trinity. I mean, you're talking about the greatest concept in Christianity, or one of the greatest, which is the Trinity. And those three are one. But do you know they got rid of it? It no longer exists in many of the Bibles. They threw it out because they said it was a manual insertion. Someone put it there, and it wasn't meant to be there. So it was retained by the King James Version, but it was removed by the New International Version and the Revised Standard Version. They removed the concept of the Trinity. So when you chop and change, it has theological implications. It's not just a matter of, a convenience and making it easier on people. They actually removed things and concepts to conform to a particular narrative, which is what we've been talking about. And just quickly, in terms of what Samuel was saying, the verse 5:7, chapter 5, verse 157 in the Quran, when you die, in Islam, when you die, it's not a true death. I don't know where he's got his information from. But in Islam, we don't call that a true death, right? The soul, it's true, is taken by God, but there's not a complete severance. There's a difference. God does take the custody of the soul, but not complete severance. And that's the difference between a true death. They call it the big death and the small death. But when we talk about the sleep, it's not a true death. It's not a complete severance. This is not the case in any way, shape or form. And he's conflating the two. And he's trying to package it in a way to say, see, this is what it means. But that's not the case. You ask any Muslim scholar and they'll tell you that. So unfortunately, he's conflating that. And I don't think that's the right way of doing this. And if you have a look, for example, at all the other prophecies, so mutawaffika. So mutawaffika, when we're talking about these verses obviously, when I say they don't apply to that, you quoted Bukhari before, it can apply to death. It can be applied. God can take the soul, and mutawaffika can apply, but not on all occasions. And this is what we're saying. With respect to Isa, alayhi salam, Jesus, this was not the case. God used that to take, in terms of possession, to take him and keep him alive and keep him protected, and he was well received. So other things that we have, if we have a look at the timelines we're talking about, from the date that it was written to the date that, in fact, of the manuscript, you're talking 150 years, some 250 years according to Mark. This is a big number. These are big years. These are really, really, really long years. The gospel authors are unknown. They're not known. We don't know who they are. Even some of the greatest scholars, like Justin Martyr, he refers to them as the memoirs of the disciples. We don't know who they are. The Gospel according to Mark, the Gospel according to Luke, but who are the actual authors? Nobody knows. The actual Gospels are hearsay. Where is the inspired word of God? And this is what we're talking about. Again, so even Luke admits, he says, this is what was given to us, handed down to them, but he doesn't say who the us is, and he doesn't say who the others are. So we're talking about authors unknown. When we also look at, for example, who went to the tomb? John said it was Mary only. Matthew said it was Mary and another Mary. Mark said it was Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Jesus, and so on. And Luke said it was the women who had accompanied Jesus from Galilee to Jerusalem. Who was it? Whom did they see there? All again, different discrepancies, different readings. We're not talking about, see, a dot and an I doesn't change the meaning, but we're talking about here a young man, an angel, nothing and nobody, and two men. Discrepancies in readings entirely. When we talk about situations of who shouldered the cross, according to John, Jesus shouldered his own cross. But if you look at Mark said it was Simon of Cyrene. Who was holding the cross? You can see it in a chronological order across the entire manuscript New Testament. All of these are throughout. And so, we're talking about these issues, but I think it comes down to really one central issue, and it's this. That, for example, Christopher Tuckett, he said, it seems impossible that you can present us with equally authentic accounts of Jesus' own life when we look at the Gospels. And he also said, another Richard Borkham, he said that what we have is an interpreted version of Jesus' life. That's what we have. Furthermore to that, when we look at it from an epistemological perspective, epistemology, I can make an inference. I can create any theory from history. And I can put forward some data, but what weight does that carry from an epistemic perspective? What weight would it have? 5 out of 10? But it will never get 10 out of 10, especially with what we're dealing with. So you can make any assumption about history, and you can say this represents the facts. But does it really, given what we have based on hearsay, which is the word of authors that are unknown? Now, I can give you reasons why the Quran is 10 out of 10. The Quran, the Holy Book of Islam, is 10 out of 10. It is the inspired word of God. It is the word of God. And I can give you an array of arguments for why that is. But today is not the time that we're having that. 1 minute. So, in any case, what we have in Islam, we have this concept of acceptance from God, forgiveness from God, but not through a medium. Jesus is a medium. And he's a medium because he was... Samuel, his name escaped me for a second there. Look, I've got a minute left, I don't have long left, but ultimately, in Islam, we don't require a medium for salvation. We don't require that in any way, shape or form. Quoting the Hajj and quoting good acts like he did before, this is without a medium. God is always centered. God is never divided. When you say that Jesus is the medium in order for your acts to be accepted, verbal or physical, this is the problem conceptually. This is the problem theologically. In Islam, that doesn't exist. There is no medium in any way, shape or form.
Thank you both. We now come to our second round of rebuttals, and it's 2 5-minute sessions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Wesam. So here I go with my 5 minutes. You mentioned Psalm 22. I actually didn't refer to Psalm 22 in my talk. I'd be happy to. It's a psalm of David, and David is the one to whom God made the covenant of the Messiah. And when the Messiah comes in the prophets, he's called the Son of David or just David. And so David's experience is prophetic of what happens to the Messiah. And Psalm 22 is all about the messianic figure suffering death, and then after that, leading God's people in worship. And so that's why Psalm 22 is a great one there. Now, Jonah, you said that in Jonah, the miracle is that Jonah is alive. Jesus never says the miracle is that Jonah is alive. He says he's going to be in the heart of the earth, which is the normal way of speaking about being in the grave. Now, you mentioned that all those different versions of the Quran are all inspired by God, but understand what that means. That means there are different books. There are different Qurans over there. And so Muslims say to us there's one Quran, but when you dig into it, they're actually different. I've got 4 different ones over there. Now, you mentioned 1 John chapter 5, verse 7, where it says, the Father, Son, Spirit, the three are one. And you said that was taken out of modern translations, and it was. But I need to point out that is not in any of our ancient Greek manuscripts. It's in a late Latin translation. And just through a quirk of history, it ended up in the King James, but it comes from a Latin translation. The early church fathers, when they're discussing the Trinity, never referred to it. It's not in the ancient manuscripts, and so we just don't have it in the Bible. We look at the evidence and make the text appropriately. In terms of not knowing who the authors are for the Gospels, well, we would disagree with that. My first question would be, where's your evidence that we don't know the authors? Certainly, we're able to look at the early church fathers, and they speak about the authorship of the Gospels. And they talk about Matthew, Mark and Luke, and those are the names that just come with them from the very early centuries. There's no reason to doubt it. And what's interesting is that they don't make up names. And so think about this. In the book of Hebrews, there's no name in Hebrews, is there? I don't know if you've ever thought about that as a Christian. We don't know who wrote it. That is, the early church fathers didn't make up names if they didn't have one. And so Hebrews doesn't have a name because they didn't make up names. The apostles were well known to the churches, and their material was already being used by the apostles in their ministries. We see that as Paul is already quoting the apostles, quoting the Gospels, and so we have good grounds for knowing who the authors were. You said that Luke speaks about. He talks about getting the information for the witnesses, but he doesn't know who they are. Well, that's not the case. When you read his book, he says that the witnesses he got it from were the apostles in Jerusalem. And in fact, Luke spent 10 years teaching the material that we have in the Gospels with the Apostle Paul. For 10 years, he's using that material before he comes to write his Gospel. So he's someone who's actively involved in ministry with the apostles. He's not a witness, but he's an apostle. And he's not a witness, but he writes it up having worked with the apostles. You spoke about the tombs at the tombs there being discrepancies as to who came to the tomb and whatever. There's actually no discrepancy at all in those accounts. They are what happens when you have eyewitness accounts. Different aspects are brought out by different people at different times. And you can easily harmonise these. So there's no problem there. And I do want to say that if you want to bring that up, then you can get parallel passages within the Quran, and you'll find that they're not identical when the Quran talks about the same event. Have a look at when the angels come to Mary or the Spirit comes to Mary. What have I got here? Now, you finally said that in Islam you don't have to have a mediator. Well, that's because Islam doesn't teach the message of the prophets. The prophets teach that God is holy and you are sinful, and you need someone to stand between you and God. The reason why in Islam you don't have a mediator is that it has a low view of God's holiness, and it has an elevated view of humanity's capability before God. But the prophets are very clear that we do need a mediator. All the way through the prophets, there's the priest who stands between God and humanity. We see that with Aaron the priest, with the priest of Melchizedek, and it comes to its fulfillment in Jesus. Thank you very much.
Always watching you. Thanks, Samuel. It still doesn't answer the question of Jonah. 3 days, 3 nights. That wasn't satisfied. Where's the 3 days and 3 nights? That simply doesn't fulfill the prophecy. So he still didn't complete that, didn't fulfill that prophecy. Then when he talks about the Quran, I'm perplexed because there is no equivalence here. The Quran, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of God be upon him, was with the companions when every single word was relayed. Every single dot, every single dash. He was with them, right? Testimony, right there, with them. He was in their presence. So there's no break in the chain of evidence. There's no 100 years, there's no 150 years. And there's one book that was revealed on the tongue of that prophet, in those dots and in those dashes. One book. Not 72, not 24, one. Revealed on the tongue of the prophet. Those different dots and dashes on his tongue. Right? There's a difference in what he's conflating here. Also, when we talk about John and the Trinity, what do you mean that they just took it out? This is the Trinity. How do you just take out a belief? Does that mean I don't believe in the Trinity? What compels me therefore to believe in it? What binds me to believe in the Trinity is not mentioned in the book. It's hearsay. And then when he's telling me about eyewitnesses, these are eyewitness accounts. So is it the inspired word of God, or is it based on eyewitnesses? What are we talking about here? Where is the inspiration that said, Jesus said, for example, I am God? There's not a single verse in the entire Bible where he said, I am God. Not a single one. For example, all of the things that I put up, Mary Magdalene, right? Mary, when she went to the tomb, on one occasion she encounters Jesus, another occasion she doesn't encounter him. Are we talking about the word of God, or are we talking about just hearsay? You can see what we're saying, and he's confirming. And you know, for example, when we talk about, and I read, there's a lot that I want to talk about, but there are many, many, many great scholars. They don't know who wrote it. How can we accept who wrote it if we don't know who wrote it, if we don't know who the authors are? What's the difference between accepting that and accepting some type of other fictional work and saying and holding that as a belief? What differentiates that? Nothing. Also, you know, when we talk about salvation, that, you know, he's talking about religion needs a mediator. Well, it doesn't. God is perfect. He doesn't require a mediator. He doesn't require a person's blood to atone for other people's sins. This is in fact something belittling of God's nature, of who he is. When he talks about that this is something which is, you know, Islam doesn't have that and we're superior and you're inferior. This is not about superiority, inferiority. This is about truth. And truth tells us that God is perfect. He's complete. He doesn't need to spill the blood of one to save others. And in Ezekiel, the son shall not bear the iniquity of the father, neither the father shall bear the iniquity of the son. The righteous of the righteous shall be upon him, and the wicked of the wicked shall be upon him. Everyone is personally responsible for what he or she does. Old Testament. You're personally responsible. You don't carry the sin of others. And so when we talk about crime and sin, God doesn't squeeze hundreds of thousands of years into one finite moment in time and says, now everybody now is required to fit into that moment of time. This is not God. You can call on him anytime, any day, anywhere. You don't need a medium. This is not who God is. God is the one who you have a direct line with. You just beseech him and he answers your prayers, as Jesus showed and told. Right? He spoke, he fell on his face and he prayed. We pray to God. We don't need a mediator. We don't need a medium. And this is honoring in fact the concept of unity, which is one God who is perfect, not bound. He is unbound, who loves. He created us out of his love. There's a general love that came over the entire creation. We were created from his affection. We're created out of his mercy, out of his compassion, that we can beseech him at any time, any day, anywhere. What happened to Jesus was made to appear that way. God saved him. This is the message of Islam. God saved him and he was not subject to death. You cannot conclude that the crucifixion or the death happened based on the evidence that you have. You simply can't, in light of the fact that you have the Quran telling you, which is testament to the word of God, telling you it did not happen. It's bold, but it's telling you it did not occur. And this is a claimant to the word of God. The Quran is claiming to be the word of God, but the Gospels are not. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, gentlemen. That was a wonderful debate. Okay, we've got some time for Q&A. So I'll open the floor. If you could please raise your hand if you have a question, and Angie will come to you. We have the gentleman here in the red tie. Oh, and if you could please, when you open your question, state to whom your question relates.
Sorry, the gentleman on the right. Your name?
Wesam.
Wesam?
Yeah.
Wesam? Yeah, Wesam. Wesam, thank you. Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. You brought a lot of energy, so thank you for coming here. My question was, if someone converts to Islam, first of all, does their relationship with God change? And if so, how? Thank you.
Great. 2 minutes, yeah.
2 minutes.
If somebody converts to Islam, does their relationship with God change, but for the better? And look at it this way: we're all on a journey. And I was thinking about this today. I'm in a committed relationship with God. I've committed myself to Him, and I've devoted myself to Him. And that relationship is above all other relationships. I see everything through that relationship. And so if somebody embraces Islam, they've embraced a truth. And that truth is supposed to enrich you. And it obviously, the reason why God, we talk about, I mentioned before, about God creating us out of His love, you know what He wants from us? He wants an act of reciprocity. He wants you to reciprocate. What that means, reciprocate, is He wants you to choose Him back voluntarily. Not because you're forced to do so, but voluntarily. So absolutely, that relationship, how does it change? You see your life change. You see things change. You see God in action. You see God everywhere. But it's accepting that truth. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't have a relationship with God if you don't accept Islam. People can have relationships with the Maker and the Creator. But the fundamental difference is that you haven't accepted that truth, that unity. And that's what it's really about. And that's what we're talking, that's what we're here tonight. That's what we're disagreeing on tonight in terms of that unity of God. So,
thank you very much. Does anyone else have a question, please? Yes.
Yep. Thank you very much for the robust discussion. It's been wonderful. My question is to the Muslim gentleman. In Islam, why does Islam deny the deity of as they say, Isa or Jesus? Is there, what's the main premise of basically not accepting Isa as the true Messiah? And only as a great prophet.
The reason why we deny the deity of Jesus is for so many reasons, but I'll just give you one. The eternal being, the essence of God is eternal. And what that means is, if you say that God enters the finite world in the physical sense, so God actually became man, if you say that, then what you've opened is you've opened up a door. God could do anything in the sense that God could render Himself dead in the real sense. Theologically, the eternal being, there are things that don't apply to the eternal. Look, let me give you an example. Can you now render yourself eternal? Never. Why? Because you existed and began to exist at a finite point in time. God, same but in reverse. Just like you can't render yourself eternal, He cannot render Himself as a finite and created being, because that's not His nature. Your nature is not to have any affiliation with eternality. Now, God will preserve you in heaven forever, but you're relying on Him. There's a big, big difference in terms of when you say, why can't He be divine? In His essential nature, He can't be. Because if He could be, what you're saying is the eternal is subject to change. If the eternal is subject to change, He could die. He could become a chair, He could become a drink, He could become a table, He could do anything. But there are things that don't apply to natures. Just like eternality doesn't apply to your created nature, createdness does not apply to His eternal nature. And that's a fundamental distinction. It's the reason why He's God. That's what makes Him God. If it was possible, then He's no longer God. It has to be absolute. He's eternal, unchanging nature.
Thank you very much. We might see if there's a question on the telephone line.
Yes, we do. We've got one that is more towards Sam. We have, if the Trinity is not referred to in the Bible, why do Christians believe in the Trinity?
Thank you.
The Trinity absolutely is in the Bible. It does not hang on 1 John 5:7 at all, and it never did when the early church fathers were looking at this doctrine. The Bible is clear that God is a higher order personal being. God is a higher order personal being. And the only reason why people have trouble with the Trinity is that they want to use the logic of being in person that they experience as themselves as a person, and they project it into God. God is a higher order personal being. He's more complex than us. He's greater than us. And what we see in Scripture is that God relates to his creation through his word by his Spirit. That's how the transcendent God relates to creation, through his word and Spirit. It's a triadic way. It's through word and Spirit. And that's the Trinity. So that's from the beginning of the Bible all the way through. God is acting from the Father through the Son by the Spirit, and then the Spirit unites us to the Son and brings us back to the Father. So it doesn't hang on any one verse. It's there from the beginning to the end.
Thank you very much. Is there a question from the floor? And just to balance things, Wesam has had 2 questions, so if you had a question for Samuel, that would balance us out.
Actually, I have 2 questions. One is already partly answered. The Shaykh stated that Trinity is thrown out of the Bible. Do you agree with that? Or if they throw it out of the Bible, why did they do it? If not, please say something about it. The second one is you also...
Sorry, we might just have one question at a time, if that's all right.
Now, as I just pointed out, I said no one threw the Trinity out of the Bible. There was a verse. So sometimes you get translations. So here's a translation of the Quran, and here's a translation of the Bible. Now, sometimes people do good translations. Sometimes they do poor translations. There was a late Latin translation which put in, as almost like an expanding paraphrase, 1 John 5:7. So it's not in the original language. It's in a translation, an influential translation. And so Christians later on have gone, hang on, that's in a translation. We shouldn't have that when we're making our own translations. So they didn't take the Trinity out. They didn't include a verse that was in another translation. So that's all that's happening. But as I said, the Trinity is there from beginning to end throughout all the prophets, in that the transcendent God interacts with his creation through his word and Spirit. And so it's that triadic way in which God interacts, and that God is personally present and distinctly present in his word and Spirit. And that's just the way it is. It's a big idea, absolutely. It's a God who's greater than us, yes. It's a God who's greater than us. Yes, of course.
Because you stated that you have 4 Quran in front of you, so do you mean the translation, or they originally differ? I mean, in terms of the version. For example, if I believe that if you open any kind of book, how old it doesn't matter the age, they should read the same. If we are reading the original text, that's what I'm concerned about the Bible. For example, if we read the original text, we may know how it reads. So when you stated that you have 4 Quran, do you mean the translations are different, or the original text also differ from each other?
Yes. Now, so when it comes to the Bible, that 1 John 5 is in translations, and translations will be different. And so some translations are good, some translations are poor. And the reference to 1 John 5 comes from a translation, and so that's not a problem for me. With these different Qurans that I've got here, these are not translations. These are different Arabic Qurans. The dots and dashes are put in different places, and so it makes different words sometimes. And you can look these up. I haven't got time to go through them here, but these are not translations. These are different Arabic texts, different readings of the Uthmanic text, if you want to be technical, but they are different Qurans. And so between this one, where are we? Between this one and this one, there's around 1,000, here we go. So this is the Quran according to Imam Hafs. And then this is a nice, beautiful one from Morocco, and that's according to Imam Warsh. And there's about 1,300 small differences. I'm not saying they're big differences, but I'm saying the idea that there's just one is not the case. You can come down and have a look later.
Great, thank you very much. Is there a question on the text line for Wesam?
Yeah, we have a question here that reads, if Jesus wasn't crucified, how did Jesus die in Islamic view, and is there any historical evidence behind this?
Jesus did not die, and that's the Islamic viewpoint. Jesus was risen to God, alive, safe and well, and he shall return towards the end of time. And that is the Islamic view. So he does have a role to play, but his role is not now. So God saved him. Jesus is loved in Islam. He is loved and revered as one of the mightiest messengers of God, whose name is mentioned more than the name of the Prophet Muhammad in the Quran. By the way, there's only one Quran, and it was on the tongue of the Prophet Muhammad. There's no different variants readings in any way, shape or form. But anyway, I wish we could continue the debate, but we can't. Anyway, but that's not true what was just said, but that's another point. Jesus in Islam, from an Islamic contextual perspective, from our perspective, is safe, and he's in the heavens. God knows best about that, but certainly his time on earth had ceased in that moment of time on earth. And there's not much more to say. Islam's position is absolute on it. He did not die. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, God says in the Quran, in the verse, certainly they did not kill him. And the they is talking about the death. He's not just talking about the disbelievers. They, as in all of them, they did not kill him. So this is, again, another point. But anyway, that's pretty much it.
Thank you. Is there a question from the floor?
Cheers. I'm interested to know why you don't think Sam's comments about the two different, or however many different Qurans, is wrong.
The reason why he's wrong is because, first and foremost, the Quran is in Arabic. The Quran is not a translation. The Gospels are a translation. The Quran is not. When you walk out of here, remember that. The Quran is not a translation. The Quran was revealed in the original Arabic. All of them, see all that he said, the Warsh and the Hafs and all of the variant readings, the dots and the dashes, they differed because the people that came at the time, there were people that had different dialects. God revealed a particular word. It's like a difference between a ya and a ta, but they have the same meaning. There's some situations they could have slightly varied reading, but again, against the same topic, but they mean the same thing. The only difference is it may be a ruling, but we're talking about something that is divinely revealed, and it was given the stamp of approval by the Prophet himself. You don't have that with the Bible. There is one Quran, one. And that was all confirmed through the Prophet. The different readings, the dots and the dashes, were all through revelation. Every single one of them. There is no different readings. There is no translation. The Quran is not a translation. The Quran is an original script. But in the Gospels, you don't have that. You have nothing in Hebrew. Nothing in the Romans that mentions even the name of Jesus. Does that mean that Jesus didn't exist? This is what we're talking about. So that's really, if you were to take that at face value, you'd think, oh, you know what's going on here? But in actual reality, there's a complete conflation here, misinterpretation. That's actually quite disingenuous, honestly, because that's not being genuine in terms of what the Quran is. The Quran is one script revealed on the tongue of a prophet who was there, who sat with them, who revealed it to them, in front of them. This is what he hasn't addressed. This is what he didn't talk about. This is what he didn't say. And I love Samuel. He's a good man, right? We're friends. I mean, we can have robust, this is real discussion, right? So we can have honest and respectful discussion. So he's just beat me, so I've gone over anyway. Sounds like a debate again.
Thank you very much. Do we have another question, please? Oh. All okay.
Yeah, I've got a question for Wesam. I guess if like the Islamic view is that Jesus wasn't crucified, why is it the appearance that he was crucified? Like, what's the purpose, and how do Muslims account for the ubiquity of the cross across the Christian world? All across the Christian world, it's a big important symbol. So why is this? Yeah.
So if Jesus wasn't crucified, oops, here we go, thank you. So if Jesus wasn't crucified, according to Muslims, but it appeared that he was, then how did that take off? Is that what you're saying?
Or like why? Like what was the purpose for I guess in the Muslim view it was a deception or confusion?
Well, I think Wesam actually put this up. There's actually about 10 different views that I've seen about what happened on the cross. And so the criticism is that Christians are in doubt about the cross and they've only got conjecture. We actually all agree that Jesus was crucified. It's the Muslims who have got the whole variety. So there are significant Muslims who will say that no one was on the cross. No one was on the cross at all. Others will say that he was on the cross and then survived. Others will say it was just a myth that developed. As I said, where that comes from, I'm not exactly sure where that idea comes from. Obviously, Wesam would say it comes from God, but we have those ideas in what's called Docetism, in that Greek philosophy. I'm not saying that Muhammad had that philosophical way of thinking, but he certainly has been exposed to Gnostic texts. So we have other things in Jesus' life which don't come from the Bible, but come from Gnosticism in the Quran. But it could also be that the Quran, and I've got a booklet, so there's a booklet outside, I think they'll be coming in here, and you can grab one, I'll make sure you get one. And you've also got the idea that the martyrs in Islam only appear to be dead. And so it's possible, and this is in the Encyclopedia of Islam, this is the one that they actually put up, and Muslim puts this one up, where he says that the Quran is describing the crucifixion of Jesus as the death of a martyr, because martyrs only appear to be dead, and instead they're actually taken up to be with God, which is Surah 3, I think it's 169, you'd get that idea. And so this Muslim academic was saying he could be described as a martyr.
Thank you very much. Do we have a question from the telephone?
Yes, we do. We have a question that says, how can humanity not need a mediator when we have a sin issue? How is God's justice satisfied without the shedding of blood? There is no payment of sin without the shedding of blood. I believe so, yes.
Sorry, how about we say a word on that?
Please.
I'll allow it, that's good.
It wasn't to...
I obviously would agree with you there, and the reason I would agree with you is for what I described at the Bible at the start, in that the Bible is not one book, but a collection of many books from many prophets over a 1500-year period. And the idea that God is holy and he will not let sinful people into his presence goes all the way through it. It goes all the way through it. And we see, as I showed in my presentation, that God accepts a blood sacrifice as a payment for sin. And so the reason I believe that is that that's just what the prophets teach. Now, when it comes to the Quran, the Quran doesn't have any temple theology. It doesn't have any temple theology, so there's no God coming to dwell with his people. There's no priesthood. There's no sacrifice for sin. There's none of that in the Quran. And so that's why the Quran doesn't have it, but that's why the Bible does, because it's talking about temple theology and it's from all the prophets.
All right, thanks. Well, justice is achieved through God. And see, the thing about it is, the way that justice works, it works naturally. Like, I'll give you an example. You had something done to you, right? Somebody committed an injustice against you. You can forgive them. You can forgive them. You can let it go. That's your prerogative. That's your right, should you choose to do that. It's natural, right? You don't hold another person accountable for somebody else's sin. So what is justice? God demands justice. So, for example, you do something wrong, you commit a sin, you can seek his forgiveness. Because God is equally just, and he's also equally forgiving and merciful and compassionate. He's all of them. He possesses all of these attributes. What are we trying to say? That his justice or his mercy is somehow deficient and can only be mediated through blood? What does that say then about his attribute of mercy and compassion and love? What does that say? I can't give it to you unless there's a sacrifice that's to be paid. It's not the case in Islam. But let's say you do something wrong against another person. Let's say I did something wrong, committed a wrong or injustice against another person. God requires, if it's money, has to be paid back. If it's not paid back in this world, you pay it back in the hereafter. Let's say you committed a physical crime against somebody. I can expect justice from God. That person has to make reparations. If that person doesn't make reparations, that person doesn't compensate, then I have God. So ultimately, justice and mercy, God is the perfect being. He has those perfect attributes. And He's laid out the law. This is where a messenger comes and he lays out the commandments. And this is what is detailed in the actual Gospels. Fulfillment of the commandments. Where Jesus, one man comes to Jesus and says, "Good master, what good thing I should do? I shall have eternal life." Look, he's asking Jesus, tell me something good that if I have it, I'll have eternal life. In Mark, he says, "Why callest thy good? Why are you calling me good? There is none good but one, that is God." Can you imagine Jesus is God and he says, "Don't call me good"? What are you talking about? He's God. If you're saying He's God, He shouldn't have refused the attribute of good. But if He said, if you want to enter into life, if you want eternal life, stick to thy commandments.
Oh, sorry. The only questions, please.
Well, I'd just like to... Jesus said, "Why do you call me good? There's no one good but God." He didn't say, which you just said, that He refused that being said. Just want to correct that. Just make myself clear. Jesus didn't say, "Don't call me good." He never said that. He said, "Why do you call me good? There's none good but God."
It's not really a question, but you can respond.
The reason, and I appreciate what you said, but He did say there is none good but one, that is God. So He's not referring to Himself. So this is humility. He's showing humility. And He refused the attribution of good. He said, "There is none good. Why callest thou good? Why are you calling me good? There is none good but one." So He referred to Himself first and foremost. And then He said, "There is none good but one, that is God." Now we say He's good. Of course He's good. Jesus is good. We say He's good. But as a humble messenger, He attributes all good to God, which is a humble messenger. Of course we believe He's good. Of course we believe that prophets are sinless, faultless. We believe that. We have the same notions. We absolutely believe that. And so make no mistake in that. But in this particular context, if He's God, there's no way that He could say that. No way. But I grant what you're saying.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, which I might take from the telephone line.
One thing that's come up several times on the text line is the statement that Jesus wasn't in the tomb for a full 3 days. Could you clarify that, or Wesam on that argument?
Excellent. Thank you for asking me that question. So Wesam correctly said that Jesus was not in the tomb for 3 nights and 3 days in the way that it's spoken about in Jonah. And so when Jesus speaks of Jonah, He says, "As Jonah was in the fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man will be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights." Now, the answer to that is, if you just keep reading the Bible, you'll see that that is a Hebrew way of just saying 3 days. And we see that in the book of Esther. I can't remember the chapter and verse, but it's in Esther, and you'll see Esther fasts, and she goes, "Let's fast for 3 days and 3 nights," or something like that. But then it's on the 3rd day, so it's before the completion, and so it seems to be just the Hebrew way of saying 3 days.
Wesam, there's a minute on the clock. Did you want to answer as well?
This is a final word, or we have a final word after this?
You've got some more minutes to go.
No, look, the prophecy is very clear on that, and the prophecy is 3 days, 3 nights, and he made a direct comparison by saying, just as He spent 3 days and 3 nights, and He was 3 days, 3 nights. This is a literal interpretation, and we take it literally. This is not a metaphor. It's not a metaphoric here. And so, look, we've discussed it here tonight, and I was telling Samuel here, we needed actually a bit more time, maybe even in the presentation and throughout, but we don't have all night, and we've got my cameraman up the back. Him and I are fasting. We were fasting, so anyway, it's good to keep it short as well. Anyone know a good kebab place open?
Wonderful. That draws our Q&A to a close. We now have Wesam, who will speak for 4 minutes in his concluding remarks, and then Samuel will do the same.
4 minutes, yeah? So thank you very much for attending tonight and hearing the words, and I hope that you've taken something and you walk away from this more enlightened. Hopefully more enlightened towards Islam, anyway. But look, on a serious note, salvation in Islam, God in Islam, and the concept is very, very clear how we attain salvation. Islam's position, there's no dispute. All scholars, all experts, all the historians, that Jesus was not crucified, that God saved him. Right? He went to God alive and he did not suffer death. And I showed you other verses of the Quran which demonstrate that to be the case. There is support also for that in the Old Testament, and there is support also for that in the Gospels, if you wanted to look at them in a historical fashion. But what we find really, we find that the Gospels themselves, you can't rely on it to give you a complete, accurate representation of history and what happened. And so there is the conjecture. That's why the Quran says what they discuss is conjecture. It's doubtful. What they're talking about, there's a lot of doubt involved. And that was demonstrated in the Christians very, very early on. Now, he spoke about one group of Christians, but there were so many groups, and they were all vying. The Christian community today that is deemed the Orthodox Christian community, if you look at the situation, the situational context, the political context, the social context, the religious context, there were many, many groups vying to be orthodoxy, to be the Orthodox religion at the time. The Christianity that you have today won the day. It wasn't in fact registered and if you like, given the tag of Orthodox Christianity at the time, at a particular point in time. They were vying to become the orthodoxy. So there was so much competition that was happening in all of the Christian communities that existed at the time. A lot of conjecture, a lot of doubt. You cannot use that to base faith on. From our perspective, God, through his mercy and compassion, sent the last testament, the final testament, not a New Testament, the final testament. And that final testament and that last testament was sent on the tongue of a prophet, revealed in Arabic, every single word, dot, letter, even if there were 3 dots, 4 dots, 5 dots. All of the variant readings of the dots and the dashes, not words, dots and dashes, were based on revelation. That means the prophet is right there in front of you, receiving from God. You have something claiming to be the word of God, the final testament, making a bold statement about Jesus. Why do we not accept that? Why do we not see it for what it is? And I can give you a myriad of evidences that in fact the Quran is the word and is the speech of God. And one book revealed in the Arabic. You can have a million translations, English, French, German, take your pick about translations. But the Quran is not a translation, an original Arabic script. But the Bible is not that. The Gospels are not that. People changed willy-nilly as they pleased to suit a particular narrative. This is dangerous and has theological implications. Samuel did not say it right about the first epistle of John. That was not done sufficiently and in a sound way. It wasn't. You're talking about something conceptual that is not in the original manuscript. By the way, 32 denominations called it a fabrication, not a mistranslation, a fabrication. We want the truth. Why don't we seek out the truth? That's what we want. Why aren't we seeking out the truth? You're a juror. You're looking at the evidence before you. Why aren't we seeking out the truth? And that's what we ought to seek. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate everybody, Samuel and the mediator and everybody here today. Thank you again.
Well, I want to thank you for coming this evening, and I hope you found it helpful, and I want to thank Wesam for coming down. I appreciate debating with Wesam because he's orthodox and wants to stand up with what Islam represents, and so not all Muslims will want to do that, and so with Wesam you do get what Islam is. So thank you for coming down. Just to go over a few points, I want to give a summary. My first point was Jesus crucified? And I showed from the Bible that it is very clear that Jesus is crucified. It's all the way through it. I showed that from a historical perspective, we've got non-Christian Jewish, Roman, and other Jewish religious testimonies that Jesus was crucified. And all historians accept this as a historical fact. And I gave those historians. And so there's simply no reason to doubt that. The view I took on the Quran is shared by other Muslims. That's where I got it from. I didn't make it up myself. I just got it from reading in Islamic sources. And so I think there's something in that the Quran is saying that it appeared to the unbelievers that they killed and crucified Jesus, but they did not. And then those other verses I showed where it talks about the taking of the soul, it says the taking of the soul was how it described the crucifixion. So I think my points stand there. Now, when it comes to how are we saved, I pointed out that the Bible is not one book, but a collection of many books from many prophets, and it has this one unified message of sacrifice. That there's a sacrifice of sin to turn aside God's wrath. There's a sacrifice to pay for sin. That's just all the way through the prophets. And that's why I believe it. As I pointed out, the Quran is just from Muhammad. It's what Muhammad recited and claimed came from God. But when Muslims say they believe the prophets, what they mean is they believe what Muhammad says about the prophets. As a Christian, I read the Law of Moses, I read the Psalms of David, I read Isaiah or Jeremiah. I don't have someone saying to me, don't read them, and I'll tell you what they mean. I have to read them. That's what we have to do as Christians. And it's from reading them that I get that full message about how God saves us. And as I pointed out, the Quran actually doesn't give us salvation. So I've got that verse from Muhammad, which I'll finish with, where he says, say, and this is from the Quran, Surah 46, verse 9, say, I am not something new among the messengers. I do not know what will be done with me or with you. I only follow what is revealed to me. I am only a warner. So Muhammad did not know what would happen to him. So there is no act of God in salvation to save you. Even Muhammad said, I don't know what will happen. But this Easter, we are remembering what God has done for us. That God himself has come to us, paid for our sins so that we can have our sins forgiven and brought back into a relationship with God. We cannot do enough good works to save ourselves. We need God to do something for us, and Christianity is the only religion where God has done something to save you and to save you completely without your good works. And I hope that this Easter, it'll be a time when you remember and find this out for yourself. Amen.
Thank you, gentlemen, for that dignified and respectful and rigorous debate. It's wonderful to see both of you presenting your cases and engaging with one another in a thoughtful and intelligent way. So well done to you. This brings our formal debate to a close. And as I mentioned earlier, there will be time for you to come and talk to either of the speakers. And I understand that they both might have a table out the front. So please do come, especially if we didn't get to you on the question line. With that, I will hand over to Sarah, but please show your appreciation again for our speakers.
Well, what a wonderful evening. It has been really beneficial sharing this time and topic as the University Fellowship of Christians with the Muslim Society. We've enjoyed debating and discussing important matters of our beliefs, religion and spirituality, and what that may mean for our understanding of the Prophet Jesus and his claims. So what could be next for you after this event? If you want to find out more about Easter, the prophets and the Christian message, we'd love to help. There's a QR code at the tables outside, and if you'd like to speak to someone at the table or speak to someone with a lanyard, you're more than welcome to. There's also Uni Fellowship events that you can find at QPay and at ufcutas.org and our Uni Fellowship Facebook page. We'd also like to invite you all to come and speak with Samuel and Wesam for the next next half hour. I wouldn't commit them to that much. Sorry, just the next half hour. So yes, please, if you have any further questions or discussion points that you'd like to put towards them, please don't hesitate in that. So thank you so much for coming and spending this evening with us, and I wish you all a very good night. Thank you so much.